I found this video on Alex Clark's YouTube channel, 2 Christian moms on public versus homeschool. Here were the highlights that I took away from this video. So 1, parents, not schools, must be the primary discipler of kids.
I know people who've homeschooled their kids and lost them to the world because they didn't equip them for the battles that are ahead.
2, shelter is preparation, not isolation. Good.
We are called as parents to equip our children for the world ahead of them. And it's true that the world is a battlefield. We're trying to equip our children for war.
3, public schools are not neutral.
Statistics are bearing out that the vast majority of Christian kids that are going to these schools are being eaten alive by the system.
We got spirit, and I know you hear it. There's no give up, give up, give up, give up in us.
What are you all's thoughts? So, Timmy, you were homeschooled. Blake, you were homeschooled.
How homeschooled were you?
Dude, extra. Extra.
Homeschooled.
Did you have friends?
Did I have credits? What did you say?
Did you have friends?
Did I have friends? Oh, man.
Besides your siblings?
I had 4 built-in friends at home.
Sorry, Kenny, how were you schooled?
I'm a product of one of the worst public school districts in America, city of Philadelphia.
And I was public schooled in Oklahoma, which I think has like 47th or 48th in the country for education. So this debate with these 2 women, I wanted to spark kind of our thoughts. You'll soon quickly realize we are all pro homeschool. So this will be less.
I'm pro anything but public school.
It's fair. It's fair.
Why?
Well, okay, this is my main thesis. Whoever is spending the most time discipling your kids is the discipler of your kids. So, like, your kids will become a disciple of whoever is spending the most time discipling them.
I was super convicted about this recently because I realized that JJ spends, I think it's like 50 hours a week at daycare, and he spends 38 waking hours a week with me.
Wow.
And I was like, dude, it was like knife in chest, like, and I still have not solved the problem. I've got to figure out, like, how do I integrate a 4-year-old into this world of like running a podcast studio? And like, I want to do that. I aspire to do that. I'd be lying if I said it's there now. I mean, the balance is still imbalanced. My wife is getting her master's degree right now, and she works full time, and so it just, the reality is we need something to help. But I feel the conviction, and so what you said like very much resonates with me, and I'm trying to figure out how do we solve for that in our family.
I want to just like maybe a quick nuance or a caveat is that there are people who legitimately are in really hard situations where they have no choice but to send their kids to a public school. Like, there are people in that category. And so for those people, I want to just say, like, you're like, may the Lord give you grace and wisdom and discernment, and may he supercharge the few hours you have with your kid every evening to overshadow whatever is going on during the daytime. Like, that does happen. However, I think there's a lot of people who think they're in the situation where they have to go to public school, but if they rearrange their life, they wouldn't have to leverage public school. I think there's a lot of, this is where based Kenny comes out. I think there's a lot of families, Christian families, that I've observed as a pastor over the years that we have to send our kid to public school because we can't afford Christian school and we both have to work. But when you actually dig into the nuance of their life, you realize, oh, actually mom does not have to work, and it would be best for the family for mom not to work. But it is so ingrained in women in our culture that if they don't work, they're not being productive. I went to school, like my wife has a master's degree and 2 bachelor's degrees, or double major bachelor's. She's very intelligent. We live in a world that says you're wasting your degree. And that's just not true. But a lot of Christian women have bought into that lie. I expect the secular progressive woman to buy into that. Okay, that's their worldview. But for those of us who love Jesus, that should not be the case. And so I think there's a lot of people who, I guess I want to start by saying that, like, if you absolutely have to have public school, okay, that's not ideal, but we understand. Pray hard and maximize the time you have. But do you really need it? And I think the answer for a lot of people is probably no. if you're willing to live in a smaller house or a cheaper house or move to a cheaper neighborhood or rearrange your life and go without the extra Netflix or the season pass or Starbucks or like whatever thing in your life that you could get rid of so that you could afford to send your kids to a Christian school potentially or homeschool.
I get really fired up about this because I look at like the history of America. So you guys know America, so despite the revisionist history around it, so Christian in our ethos and our founding, right? The populace was 98% Christian. And when you say 98% Christian, doesn't equate to the way we would define and measure that statistic today. Like these were Bible following, not to say they were all born again believers, but at least the ethos was just very, very truly Christian, what we would consider Christian. And you're like, how do we get to where we are today in this country? This institution of the state and going secular, and then the state getting involved in education, the government getting involved in education, that's a weird thing, by the way. Like we just know it, we take it for granted nowadays, but like at the founding of this nation up until like, I think it's around maybe the mid 1800s, the state was not educating our kids. Like, why would we want the government to educate our kids? Even when it was like back in the day, like we had a Christian, like it represented a government basically. They still were wary of that. Like, we don't want the state. That's not the state's role to educate our kids. But yet in today's world, we're like, oh, this is just the way it is. Like, education happens by way of the government. And it's like, whoa.
And when it was introduced, it was introduced by something called the Old Deluder Satan Act, which was like the premise was we don't want kids to be deceived by Satan, so they need to learn how to read so that they can read the Bible.
It was to read the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But even then, like we had dissenters that were like, hey, yeah, right now it's this, but if we turn this over to the state, and give them this
fallacy.
But exactly, and that's what was being said back then, right? It's like that you can go back to the history on this. So like even the fact that we're here right now, people like take it for granted, and homeschooling is weird. Which yes, I get it. It is weird. It was even weirder when we did it than it is today. Like it's become a lot more socially acceptable today. But like actually, the government educating your kids, that's what's weird.
Yeah, that should.
That's what's weird.
How would you guys steelman the position of sending your kids to public school? Is there a way to steelman it?
If you are, I want to be fair, someone who really believes that their educators are experts in pedagogy. Like this person went to school, they've got years of experience, they are experts in how to train kids in these competencies. And therefore expecting, so like my wife, who is 34 years old and doesn't have any training in pedagogy, her master's degree is in missiology, how to do missions, like someone will go, so you're going to expect Milena to train your children to be, or you're going to do it? Like, you guys don't have training in that. This person has been doing it, and there's this flock of people who are experts in training.
And it is a disservice to your child.
Yeah, it's a disservice to your child to not let the experts do it. They're going to do it better than you. Don't you want that for them? That would be the argument, I think, from that side.
So I have toured a bunch of schools as a kids book author. And what I found is like public school doesn't mean the same thing in different geographical locations.
That's a great point.
So like when I was touring schools in Orlando, school looked a certain kind of way. When I would go to Miami, it looked a certain kind of way. When I would go to Arkansas, it looked a very different kind of way. And so I would say to steelman it is like, if you were to rewind the clock by a few decades probably, you could see where the public school value system was not antithetical to a Christian's value system. It wasn't necessarily promoting the Christian value system, but it wasn't antithetical to the Christian value system. Right. And I would say that there are still public schools that are like that, but Christians should be extremely careful because the woke machine, like the beast, is really taking over the public school system. So when I was in Miami, there were charter schools that were basically run by Christians that just didn't ever preach Christ, but they were basically run by Christians.
Yeah.
And when I would be in Arkansas, almost every public school was run by Christians. And so there was pressure that they were under, but they were doing a pretty good job of maintaining a school that was not antithetical to a Christian worldview.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. I have a friend who's a pastor in rural Arkansas, actually, and he's in a small town, like 2 hours outside of Little Rock. He's like, there's 2 small churches in our town. The principal and most of the teachers go to my church where I'm the pastor. And he's like, I have no problem sending my kids to this public school because I know the teachers, and I know because we're in a rural setting, we can fudge things that probably they would not love if it was being, audited by the state. I mean, we can get away with it. He's like, but like that's an extremely unique scenario.
Yeah.
Where he's just saying we're not promoting Christ in the school, but we're intentionally doing things to not be anti-Christian values.
Yeah.
So this is where I think it comes down to like, again, how did we get here? Because like what you're saying is like there's still maybe some public schools that aren't quite fully antithetical to Christian values. I would still struggle to find examples of like where you're not still seeing that happen in today's world there. Right. I think again, 30 years ago, that could be true. But so there's the greatest myth that I think Christians have allowed ourselves to buy into, which has gotten us to where we are today, is that there's this myth of a secular neutrality. Mm-hmm. That is a myth. And so we bought into it, which is what allowed us to go from, Christianity, like, again, there's so much background in terms of how Christian our nation was, not just in the populace, but how that manifested in the public sphere. Like we used to have out of Congress and the presidency, the office of the presidency, we used to have calls for national repentance to Jesus Christ, not just some like being in the sky, to Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And this is the same like, separation of church and state. That's what the founders wanted. Clearly, there was a difference there. So anyways, we allowed ourselves to go more and more secular. So we started there. Our public schools were by and large ran by very devout Christian men in the past too. But then we embraced this idea of secularism. And in the beginning, and this is the key thing here, there's a term called cut flower syndrome, right? So the cut flower syndrome basically says, like, you're going to see the fruits of a Christian ethic if it had a Christian root, right? So the flower had a Christian root, and that's what made it into this beautiful thing, right? Not that there still wasn't sin and problems before, but that's what made the beauty that we see was the Christian root. The public schools used to reflect that as well. They were rooted still in a Christian root. As you've taken God out of that, so intentionally really over the years, we get the cut flower syndrome. So like most of our schools right now, most of us could look at and be like, okay, yeah, that flower is dead. And that's why even non-believers don't want their kids in those schools. But there's still maybe some schools where it's like, the flower is, I can still see it. It's withered, but I can still see it. But that is exactly the problem, is that there really is no neutrality. And so in the beginning, you're still riding off the waves of the Christian ethic. But as soon as you disconnect God, that ethic has no basis anymore. And so the agenda actually changes, right? So the agenda is no longer one to like raise virtuous kids in the sense of like the way God defines virtue. We now have a new definition of virtue. And that's what we mean when it's like, it's not neutral. They define a new morality, a new virtue for your kids. And then that becomes their agenda, is to teach them that new virtue. So like one thing that's been helpful for me to think about with this, as parents are asking these questions, is like, if you ask the same parent that's going to send their kids to a public school because, again, they believe, hey, it's fairly neutral. They're going to learn math really well. They're going to learn the basics of science and reading, all those things. That's what I care about, so I'm sending them there. It's like, okay, would you send your kids to Islamic school? And usually the answer would be, of course not. Well, why? Because, then, they were going to try to influence them with their Muslim values, right? And their Muslim beliefs. That's the same thing that's happening in a secular school.
But the Muslims just teaching them math.
Exactly.
Like
and so like those same values your kids will get values pressed upon them. And I think it's like the famous Aristotle quote of the student becomes like the teacher. Like if you really love that teacher, and that's the only one they're getting exposed to, it could make sense, right? If that's a very strong Christian teacher. And there's also a separate argument of like, what about the environment that they're in, which we haven't even discussed yet. Yeah. The overall kind of kid environment, which I think there's something very unique about homeschooling that allows you to intentionally expose your kids to the right peer group even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that really does matter.
And there's no, outside of school, there's really not any, like throughout the rest of their life, they're not going to spend time with just their age group.
Yeah.
This is you've created this, people say like, you're not going to socialize your kid if you homeschool them. Well, you've created this incredibly weird social environment, and you're just socializing them in this incredibly weird, almost like prison-like
it's an artificial
environment.
Yeah.
That's not good for their socialization. What's good for their socialization is for them to engage in relationships with like people of various different age ranges.
Yeah. There's the cut root syndrome. I want to make sure people don't miss that. because that is such a brilliant illustration. Because you'll hear people say things like, "Well, I went to public school and I turned out fine. So what's the big deal?" What they don't realize is, yes, when the flower is rooted, it's going to bloom. Then you remove it from its root, which is a clear American Protestant, not just Christian, but Protestant worldview at the founding of our country. You remove that, the flower still looks good for a period of time after it's cut from the root. So the public school system, cut from its root, still produces good flowers for a while, but it's in the process of dying. And so if you went to public school 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and it turned out fine, okay, but like there's been decades of death since then.
100%.
And I also am like, was it really as good as you think? I don't know. Like,
so one of the best lines is actually, I think, red-pilled more Christians. Like from my understanding, it's been thousands of Christians, maybe hundreds of thousands of Christians. It was a sermon preached by Bodie Buckham, and the line went very, very famous. And it was basically he was breaking down the statistic. I think at the time it was 70 to 80% of children of evangelical Christians were no longer walking in the faith as of like 18 years old, something like that, right? So after they got through secondary school, and his whole line was, "Why would you be surprised if you send your kids to Caesar that they come back as Romans?" And that's exactly what's happened, because again, the secular neutrality does not exist.
That's right. My daughter's 4. She goes to a pre-kindergarten. Here in Florida, we have VPK, so it's state funded. Most people go to public school for that, but you can use it even for private school. So she goes to a small little Presbyterian, overtly conservative pre-K. There's 14 kids. I know the pastor there, so I know that like what they're instilling in my kid, and it's only 3 hours a day, and it's only for one school year. And so we decided to do this, and it has been great. However, while most of the teachers there and the leadership of the school hold to my theology, they would hold to a reformed view, reformed evangelicalism. There's one teacher that doesn't, who I know is a slightly different theology. Still a Christian, conservative, great woman, but slightly different, her theology. I know just talking to her. And Letty, my daughter, said something a couple days ago, and I'm like, oh, I know where she got that from. She made a comment. She said, if we make good choices, we go up. If we make bad choices, we go down. And I was like, that's workspace. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I understood what her teacher meant by it.
Yeah.
But I know her teacher is a conservative Christian who I would trust, evangelical, loves the Bible. But I know that she believes that Christians can lose their salvation, which is something I believe the Bible does not teach. So I don't want my daughter embracing. I don't want my daughter thinking Jesus loves you, but if you do enough bad things, he'll send you to hell. I don't want my kid believing that. And so I want her to. So like, yes, if we make good choices, we go up. We make bad choices, we go down. But the problem is none of us make good choices. So Jesus makes good choices for us.
Yeah.
Like making sure I understand. Like, so at a Christian conservative school, there was something that I could tell my daughter caught from her teacher that I would go, how much more is she going to catch at a place where the person holds a worldview drastically different than my own?
Kenny, you did a TEDx talk years ago now, and I feel like I bring this up probably once a week with somebody in conversation, but the overarching idea from that talk was mentorship is a game of time. And when I think about the people that I've had that have most influenced me and would say that I have had influence on them, it is people that I've got to spend considerable amounts of time with. And so in the lane of mentorship, which is what your talk was about, it was meeting somebody for coffee once a month is. You're not, if you think that you're going to be able to disciple somebody or mentor somebody with a coffee once a month, that's not how this works. Like, you just need way more time. And so the idea that like we as fathers need to be architecting our worlds and our lives around the optimization for spending way more time.
And this argument doesn't make sense in any other sphere. Like, you wouldn't be like, oh yeah, my child's gonna be healthy because I feed my child one healthy meal a day, but yet they're eating crap for the entire rest of the day.
Yeah.
So like that doesn't work, and the same thing doesn't work with time. And also, I thought of this while you were talking, is when you think about a child's development, They're influenced the most when they're little by who they look up to. And as they get older, they're influenced the most by who they who's rubbing shoulders with them, who's basically their peer.
Side, yeah.
So, and in both cases, you want to be incredibly careful about the environment that you're architecting for your child. Who is my child looking up to? Literally, like they're literally sitting down and looking up to a teacher. Who are they spending gobs of hours looking up to? I would like for that person to have my value system. So if I can't find a person who has that value system, well, then one of us needs to take that spot.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was just going to say too, like for me, I'm a huge advocate for countercultural education. So I don't think that there's like one type of schooling that is like the only way to do it. I do think that there are superior ways to do it. But I don't think there's one type of way to do it. But I think we should, as Christians, we should be looking to do things counterculturally that aligns with biblical principles, right? And so I know we're spending a lot of time like bashing public school, but I also think there is a world where it's like there are certain private schools I think are amazing for their kids, right? I personally believe that homeschooling is the best path if you want to marry, which you should, the time with father and mother, especially mother. Mothers typically take that role, but fathers being more involved in their education. Like, I want to do a better job of that actually with for Lexi, because like there were certain subjects that my dad would get more involved with. So like math, Latin, my dad would be more involved with. I think there's something really powerful about like dad coming alongside in the homeschooling even. But I just wanted to say that, like, I don't think there's only one type of homeschooling. Otherwise, like, you're not doing it the Christian way. But I do think we should be like living counterculturally, which means like how we educate our kids, because you said it before, but I want to bring that back out again. Education is like, it's very synonymous with discipleship, especially when you're young and impressionable, right? So it's very synonymous. And who do you want discipling your kids?
Yeah,
right.
That's the filter. So yeah, is there a way to do it that's not homeschooling, that's still God honoring? Yes, I believe that for sure. But I think we should be moving towards, hey, what is the ideal? Is there an ideal?
That's right.
And with homeschooling, by the way, like,
How close can we get to the ideal?
and most people know this by now with homeschooling, but it's not just like mom and dad teach you everything at home, right?
Right.
It's that mom and dad are basically running your education for
right.
you. And yeah, there's going to be some subjects, like, it's such a cool thing to teach your kids how to read. I don't know if have you been there yet with Letty? Yeah,
Starting.
Yeah, it is amazing to teach your kids how to read. That's something that I was able to be a part of with my older two so far.
I taught my little brother how to read.
That's hey, wow.
That's why you're in kids book.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's what do they call it? That's scaling homeschooling for the
And
parents.
that's another example of like my little brother was being discipled by me, because when I'm teaching him how to read, we're having way more conversation than just how do you read.
That's right.
Yeah. But if you think about like the flexibility that homeschooling allows, and that's why it's gotten, I think, less weird in today's world. Like back in the day, it was so weird because, to be fair, public schools weren't as crazy as they are today, right? So when my parents pulled us out, they saw what was coming. They still couldn't envision the whole trans thing. Obviously, they couldn't envision that.
Kids
right?
being cats and going to litter
They
boxes.
couldn't envision that kind of stuff. But they saw the clown world emerging, and they saw like the lack of secular neutrality. They knew that there was an agenda to get into kids. And by the way, anybody who doubts this, like, you can actually go back and there's, I don't know if it's Du Bois, there are some leading like Marxist thinkers that talk about this is the strategy. This is the way as we get into the education system. And because the state controls the education system, it's going to be pretty easy for us to do that, right? So my parents saw that. Dewey, that's what I was thinking of.
John
Dewey,
yeah.
yes. But what I was going to say is, like, nowadays, I think it's less weird because there's more and more people recognizing the flexibility that homeschooling offers. And it's not just like mom and dad have to teach you everything that they know and things they don't know, right? It's that mom and dad are going to figure out the best ways to make sure you learn the things you need to know, and make sure your values are influenced the right way.
I want to be the architect.
The
of
architect.
my child's education, and homeschool.
And it may look like
just happens to be a big part of that recipe.
And it may look like, hey, you have a co-op, or you have a classical element that you're going 3 days a week to, or something like that. But you're very intentional about controlling that experience in a way that is forming your kids in the way that God wants them to be formed.
The flexibility part, it is a component that I think people don't realize. In American society, going back to the 1600s, before even the American Revolution, the moment and the region in which we had the best educational system in American history, the highest literacy rates, the best competency with mathematics, best understanding of agriculture, best in every major competency is in New England in the early to mid 1700s. That's the smartest we'd ever been in that time period, right? And you look in that era, you have Jonathan Edwards arises, probably the greatest mind America's ever produced. Comes from that region, that era. You look at how many hours in a week they actually educated their kids. It's remarkable. It's unbelievable. Today, kids go to public school 5 days a week, 6, 7, it's like 30, 40 hours a week, right? Well, in Puritan New England, kids went to school somewhere like 6 to 15 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, they just everything you need to learn in a week to be the best we've ever been is 6 to 15 hours a week. Well, then why did we start doing 30 or 40 hours a week? Well, it's the Industrial Revolution, 1820s, 1830s, when people start going to work in factories, and now they need childcare. And so, actually, you don't need to do school that much. It's actually a lot of filler, and it's waste of time. And so, if we don't have an option by next year, my wife and I, we're likely going to do classical conversations. Yeah. It's a classical homeschool. You go to school 1 day a week, for about 8 hours, 7 or 8 hours in one day. And then you have basically homework for the rest of the week, but parents are really involved. Prayerfully trying to think about how to start a school in our area. There's some Christian schools that do 1 or 2 days a week. I think all those kind of options could be on the table.
My brother does that. My brother has his kids go to school 1 day a week with a classical conversations type school. And then they basically are just doing homework for the rest of the week together. And to your point about time, so everybody that I've ever talked to that switches from public school to homeschool, which hasn't been a lot of people, but whenever I've had this conversation, they're surprised at how much time, how little time it takes to homeschool your kids, how little time it takes to do everything that happens in public school from an education standpoint. That's right. How little time that takes to do at home.
Yeah. And you think about not only how much time they're spending in a classroom in public school or traditional school setting, the classroom time is insane, but it's also the homework time after the fact. It is crazy. We have friends that, they have a 7, 8-year-old and maybe they're spending, 8 hours a day in a classroom setting or somewhere near that. And they're coming home and they're able to eat, and then basically the rest of their evening before they go to bed is homework. That's outrageous. Yes. It's not necessary. But one thing I would add too is when you said learning, it's everything they need to learn. So to caveat that a little bit, expound upon that, it's not necessarily everything they need to learn. It's more from the traditional academic approach, a subject, getting into that. But if you think about learning, and that's like taking a more holistic view to learning, that's what home education really is, and homeschooling really is. The approach is we want our kids to be learning all the time. It's who do we want them to be learning from, and what things do we want them to be learning, right? So do they need to be learning these certain subjects that are state approved at the age that they are, or do we want them to be seeing hey, how does dad do his business? Mm-hmm. And what does it look like when mom is taking care of the household in these ways and making purchasing decisions, and that is and how are mom and dad engaging in the public sphere, and they go to the city council meeting, they take us with them. That is the beauty of home education.
And that's to weave onto that a little bit. That's also the power in entrepreneurship. And I think I heard somebody talking about this idea of in today's culture, we kind of conflate entrepreneurship with you got to go start a technology company and scale it to the moon. But when you think about the historical context of entrepreneurship, it's being the local plumber in the town, or having a service that serves the community well. Because what that business ownership does for you is it creates the most amount of flexibility that we've been talking about is so necessary for a lot of this to actually work.
And I think that's why you see so many entrepreneurs, even ones that aren't necessarily, they wouldn't call themselves to be super Christian or on fire for their faith, that they have been so drawn to homeschooling in today's world is because we, as entrepreneurs, you've experienced a taste of flexibility and freedom. You aren't in the industrialized kind of rote system. And you're okay, why would I want to be beholden to my second grader's school schedule and calendar?
Right. Yes.
That sounds ridiculous, right?
It is.
And people are starting to realize
the conversations that are my wife, who's worked at Disney for almost 15 years now. She's a dolphin trainer. She, has the job that 9-year-old girls dream of having. Now she's a manatee researcher. I mean, she's doing an incredible job in her career. But it's always been this very like, you show up at this time, you leave at this time. So it just seems so abnormal to me. Yeah. Like, why on earth would I allow the second grade teacher to dictate how, like, and no.
And that's where I wanted to kind of flip on its head. It's like, we should embrace the weirdness symbol, like whatever they throw at us. And there's a lot of like, and by the way, just real quick on that, I think historically, the weirdness that you would see from homeschooling, it was less about lack of socialization, even though I think there is an element of that where some parents don't do a great job of that. I think it's an adverse selection issue. So it's like what does your population start as? Like, there are a lot of weird people in the public school system, a lot of them, right? There was a lot of weird people homeschooling too, especially back in the day, and a lot of them were like more weird, like over sheltering people. I think that maybe they didn't start off like they may have been the ones that went through a public school system and they were the weird kids in public school, and then they're now homeschooling their kids. So you have that. So it's not like that homeschooling makes them weird. It's like, where do you start? But to the point of like, I think we turn it on its head now. We say, actually, the alternative is what's weird. Like, right. This has been the way that society has educated children for centuries. And all of a sudden, as of the Industrial Revolution, we have this like new system for schooling, and we're seeing the effects of that. And I think more people are waking up to the effects of that. And like, that's actually weird. To send your kids off for 10 hours and not see them, and for them to be in a classroom and then come home with homework, that's actually weird. Yeah. To be beholden to your second grader's calendar, that's actually weird, right?
We, a couple things to that. What we've noticed, when the modern homeschool movement gets going in the 70s, it does feel like it's like a weird crew of people. I'm thankful for those guys because they lay a foundation that is so helpful in our way. But like it gets going, but it's mostly Christians. But what we've seen, it starts around 2010, but then COVID really did. Of all the crazy things about COVID, the overreaction and the hard things that happened in COVID, one of the silver linings is people begin to realize, like these are non-believing people at home on Zoom watching their kid do Zoom, and they're going, what is my kid learning? Why are they wasting their time? Why are they light bulb
why are they talking about this in this way? Like, I think that, seriously, there are people that got exposed to the values being
the opposite.
Transmitted.
So I was running a podcast called The Literacy Advocate, so that I could talk to teachers, because teachers is who would let me come and visit their school as a kids book author. And I remember there were some teachers that I would talk to, and they would say, and I asked them how difficult it is now that you're doing virtual school. And one of the things that they said was difficult was now the parents are overhearing what I'm teaching.
Yes.
And will sometimes intervene so that I can't teach the kids what I know to be right, because
you mean
the parents
that
are overhearing.
It wasn't neutral?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
So like, I think
that is terrifying.
That's right. And COVID has like woken people up. So now you have a lot of people who are not believers moving toward homeschooling. So now I have a really good friend of mine who sells homeschool curriculums at conferences and conventions. And he said, because he's been in this business like 25 years, he's like, the only demographic we ever served were mostly conservative Christian moms. That's who we targeted. That was our homeschooling base. He goes, now we're having to come up with curriculum that feels slightly less overt Christian because we want to sell to those people. Now, whether or not he should do that, that's a different conversation. But he's like, we have this new market of like, and he's like, and it's mostly
entrepreneurs,
conservative dads. He's like, and he said it's the Trump effect. He's like, there's a bunch of dudes who've been red-pilled. They were mostly moderate or politically apolitical, and somehow in the Trump years, they've become more politically conservative. They're pulling their kids out of public school, but they're not necessarily believers. So they want a homeschool curriculum that will teach their kids like traditional American values and conservatism without the Christian. And he's like, we're struggling to come up with a product that serves that, but we're trying. We got to make money off it. So it's just the movement we're currently in. And now there's millions of people doing homeschooling. Last thing I'll say this, I was a professor for 7 years. I still do adjunct stuff online. And so at 3 different schools I've taught. In my two schools full-time, 1 adjunct, kids who come from homeschool backgrounds, students, outperform the public school and Christian school kids.
Look at the stats.
People say all the time, "Oh, your kid's not going to learn." Like, as a professor, the ones who can communicate best, who can write the best, are kids that come from homeschool backgrounds, or they come from a strong classical school. That would be the exception. And I remember someone who actually knows both Blake and Timmy, was telling me about, I'm just nervous about homeschooling because my kid won't be socialized. And I was like, do you know Blake and Timmy? I was like, yeah, like they were both homeschooled. Do you think those guys struggle with social acumen? They're two of the most articulate dudes I've ever been around. Like I don't think you know what you're talking about. Sorry.
I was gonna say, like, of my closest friends, you two, like, you are actually the exception when I think about people around, and my wife, that are great critical thinkers. I often think about you two as like, and my buddy David Dunn, who is also homeschooled, and just an exceptional critical thinker.
I tend to think of homeschoolers. Yeah,
and that is something that I feel like I struggle with myself, and a lot of factors for that, not probably well beyond just public school, but I think, man, if I'm seeing it modeled in amongst some of like friends that I am very close with, and I see a character trait in them that I desperately want in my own child. Oh, what's the common denominator there? Like how they were educated, the amount of time that they spent from ages like 5 to 18 is probably a pretty important thing to spend some real time considering.
And just on this point, my mom was English as a second language. So my mom's an immigrant, English is a second language. She still says sentences wrong all the time. And I love her. She's wonderful. And my dad did not get a college education. And yet I scored every single year, because you have to take a state test to go from one grade to the next. I scored in the top, whatever the top is like the top 1% or whatever. Every year scored in the top 1%. I was the highest in my classes in college. I got my grades paid for college for the first 2 years, and like just by every worldly metric of education, I outperformed, and so did all my siblings, all 6 of my siblings, from a English as a second language mother and a dad who didn't get a college degree, who decided they were going to homeschool their kids.
I heard an argument the other day that I want to get you all's take on before we close out here. It is a selfish act to homeschool your child, because if everyone were to homeschool, then you basically take away this public service, and so it is a net negative to society by pulling your kid out of the system.
No, because all those little homeschoolers that grow up to be entrepreneurs, because a large percentage of them grow up to be entrepreneurs, would create schools that solve that problem. Well, and also Christians tend to be the most charitable people. Yeah. And so a lot of the reasons that people that can't afford non-public school are able to still do non-public school is because of either conservatives who vote for legislation that creates that possibility, or for Christians who are very charitable.
I'm not sure I understood. Sorry, I agree with Timmy's point, but I'm not sure I understood the question. Sorry.
By pulling your kids out of the system will no longer exist.
Oh, got it.
So I would say good.
Yeah,
I would say good, but
if that's all it takes, let's do it.
I would say good, because I don't think the state should be involved in education. But then the question is, the point they're making basically is, you don't care about other kids that can't afford to homeschool, their parents can't homeschool them, or they can't go to a private school. That's a problem. And what has happened is that used to be solved for by the charity of Christians and private individuals, creating the opportunity for kids that can't afford to have their tablet and things like that's what happened, right? And then all-knowing, all good state comes in and says, oh, we're actually going to make this free. We're going to take a bunch of taxes from everybody, and we're going to do it this way. It sounds good. Again, it's not necessarily the heart that's wrong. It's the implementation of it and what happens, especially when it becomes secular. And they do a horrible job at outcomes. We haven't even gotten there in terms of we talk about the homeschooling outcomes. Let's talk about the outcomes of the public school system. Horrific, right? Mm-hmm. And so, so my answer is good, but then this goes to the broader point of conservatism. We want to see a smaller government, and we want to see a bigger church. So we want to see a bigger church that's actually better for the world, not just from like a philosophical way to approach it, but from a pragmatic perspective, because private individuals and charitable individuals do a much better job solving issues than the government does.
I heard once, many years ago, someone say, show me a task that the private sector can't do better, faster, cheaper than the government. That task doesn't exist. Like, the government can do a lot of great stuff, but the best stuff the government does is because they've outsourced it to some brilliant business, right? Like, and so we're seeing that with charter schools. And Pennsylvania was one of the first states in the, I forget what year it was, that really embraced the charter school system. Michigan and Pennsylvania were the first two because of Detroit and Philly, because those two public school systems were so wretched. And so charter schools are very popular in Pennsylvania. What charter schools are, it's the government saying, we're going to give this private business a certain amount of money to run a school. And the charter school in Philadelphia, public schools are closing every year, a handful. They're closing, and charter schools are opening, and the quality of education is going up because private businesses, for-profit businesses, are running the education. And it is frustrating and infuriating public school teachers in Pennsylvania because they see in 10, 20, 30, at some point, the public school system in Philadelphia will be almost obsolete and will almost not exist. And for that, I would say praise God.
Amen. And also, just from a policy perspective, for those curious, that's the power of the voucher system that you're seeing in Florida. I think Arizona has it too. Maybe other states are moving that way. But it's at least taking the way the government currently taxes its citizens to provide for education, and it's giving choice back to parents, right?
Right.
And so that's actually a powerful thing. Do I think that the government should tax us at the rate they tax us? No. Do I think that tax money should necessarily go to education? No. I do think it should be private. But in the meantime, like, this is a very good solution to break up the stranglehold that
Monopoly.
the public, and it's just terrible outcomes. And so take the value transmission out of it, even though that's significant. The vouchers actually expose the failings of the public schools and allow parents to say, hey, I want to send them to a higher performing institution. And so it creates a competition, which is actually a beautiful thing.
And from my research, the vouchers are less money, I think, than the amount that the state is paying per child to put kids in public school. And so you're seeing, look at what parents can do with a fraction of the amount of money that the state is doing. Like, I think it's something like, depending on the state, it's somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 per child in public school.
Yeah. Pennsylvania, the stat I most saw, several years old now, but it's about 70% what a charter school is spending. So if you take $10,000 a year from a family and you just give that money back to the family and let them use it how they see fit, that kid's gonna have better outcomes.
We got spirit, and I know you hear it. There's no give up in us.